All right. So Gabe, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for everyone for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, first question we have is, what is your background? Where did you grow up, and why did you move to Moscow?
Yeah. So I grew up, actually, I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, or the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and graduated high school from there. My dad was a pipe fitter, kind of turned gas engineer on the job training. He worked with Texas Instruments, Intel, and then the year I graduated high school in 1997, my dad moved the family to Eugene, Oregon, and it's very two different cultures going from Texas to Oregon. And from there, I got recruited to play basketball down in college in California. And my brother, who's 2 years older than me, he came here to go to New St. Andrews College in downtown. And so when he got here, he liked the community and loved everything. And he talked me into coming to finish my school at University of Idaho. So that's what brought me here. I came to U of I in 2002, majored in communications with the emphasis in business, and barely made it through my statistics classes. Barely made it through Steve Peterson's class. And enjoyed, actually, I'll kudos to Steve Peterson. I took his macro and micro classes, and that was before I really, you're just a college student. You haven't really thought through economics. You haven't really thought through what the political ramifications are of economics. Well, Steve was actually the first class that kind of introduced me to that world. And I don't think I got a very good grade in this class, but I really enjoyed the topic and its connection. And incidentally, I've been very much involved in this topic since. I graduated in 2005. Same year I married my wife. She's also a graduate from University of Idaho in 2007. And I went to work for the local economic firm here in town, economic modeling specialist. And I was about the 9th person hired on in 2005, and then was with the company for about 12 years, and just had such a that was kind of business school for me. So I basically grew at the company, became vice president of business development before I left. And I mean, man, it was just such a on-the-job training. It was just such a great business school in that sense. And I learned so much about economics. I learned so much about business. I learned, we worked a lot with education partnerships, workforce development partnerships, economic development. And so that was just such a fun run working at MZ, and just I really grew a lot in my career. And in 2016, I left MZ to start my own consulting practice, which I still do. I basically do a lot in public relations and media and marketing. And then I also started a Christian political podcast, which is now a TV show called Cross Politic, and everything. And so that's kind of my background is, education through college at U of I, a lot of on-the-job training in the business world and the economic world. And then I'm kind of a political pundit now, if you want to call it that, with a little public relations firm.
Oh, so what makes Moscow special to you?
I think everyone kind of, after you move to Moscow and then you're here for 6 months. I think you first come here and you're like, this is just a typical college town, or just kind of a normal, nothing interesting about it. But then after about 6 months, I mean, I remember when I moved here in 2002, I was here because of my brother. I had no real connection here. And so, but after about 6 months, I really just kind of fell in love with the town. And I think Moscow, it's not just Moscow that's unique. I mean, our Latah County is just really unique. I mean, you got fun little interesting boutique cities like Kendrick and Julietta, all the way to logger towns of Potlatch and kind of the rural hunting life out there. And so I love Latah County because it's got this mix of agriculture, community, and frankly, I mean, university towns. I was in a university town in Oregon. They just have a lot of energy to it, and the students really do bring a lot of energy to our community. And then our summers, and then the students leave. God bless you guys, you leave. And then our summers are nice and peaceful and fun.
Well, so what attracted you to politics, and particularly the local politics?
So I think kind of first I'll answer the question why particularly local politics, and then I'll answer what attracted me. Local politics, I think we've lost the importance of local politics. Every 4 years it seems like we get in this frenzy of voting for a president. We get in this frenzy of thinking that this is the most important year of our lives and we need to elect this president. And there's not truth to that, but we've lost how important local politics are. In fact, the founders and the way we structured states in relationship to the federal government, and then how we structured the local cities and counties in relationship to the state government, it was very intentional to have. Used to be that the county was your most important elected offices. You think the more local your politics are, the better off everyone's voice is. I can't go into President Trump's office and argue with him about what he's doing. I can't go into Brad Little's office, let alone Governor Little's office, and argue with him or disagree with him and him hear my voice. But in county politics, I can go to Mayor Lambert, I can go to the county commissioners, I can argue with them. That's healthy, that's good. And so local politics is really important, because it's actually the best place for your voice to be heard in how your city or how your county is structured and governed. The reason why I got involved in this race was because our current county commissioners have raised taxes 4 years in a row. And I want my children not to be priced out of the housing market when they grow up to buy a house, Lord willing, in 20 years. The more we've gotten to the point, I think the government has a legitimate role in collecting taxes. So I'm not like this weird libertarian anti-taxer, but I think we've gotten to the point in our politics, the more we're taxed, the less freedoms we have. The more government bureaucracy we have, the less freedoms we have. And so that was the big issue. That is very simple. It's just a fiscal, taxation issue that got me into this in the beginning. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this later, but obviously there's other reasons why I'm in this now.
Sure. So you have this podcast, and I guess now a TV show. So why is it important, and like, what are some goals that you have for that?
For my TV show?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think, man, that's a long question for me, or a long answer for me. I'll try to shorten as much as possible. So I grew up a Christian. I'm a Christian. That's my I believe Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins, and I believe that God and His Word gives us the principles for living out a good, true, and beautiful life. We aren't. Our world is not a relativistic world. Our world is a set of axioms and truths that govern how we should live. So one of the things that had happened in the church is that the church had kind of left politics alone. The church said, we aren't going to speak about politics. We aren't going to speak into politics. We aren't going to teach our people about how to think about, laws and regulations and taxation and all these political things. And so the church hadn't been doing that. I mean, I'd argue for, probably a century, not just decades, but a century. And so what would happen would be everyone would go to church on Sunday and get a good gospel message and then go home. And then they would, go listen to, Rush Limbaugh, or they'd go to listen to some political pundit and get from them how they should be thinking about politics. But what happens is you actually disconnect ultimate truth from how we should be thinking about politics. And so we're left with no real foundation on how we should be sorting through politics. And I think we're reaping the benefits of that, because our society, our culture, not just here in Moscow, but nationwide, we're divided. And I think we're largely divided because we can't even agree on fundamental moral principles anymore. And so that's kind of a big answer of what motivated me, is because I wanted to for myself, I wanted to learn how to think about, okay, how does the Bible apply to taxation, or what does the Bible say about you know, building county roads or whatever. I just wanted to be very practical with how I thought about my walk and my faith in relationship to the politics around us. So that was my initial motivation with the TV show.
Wow, so that's ambitious. So now, contrasted with your opponent, you have not expressed concerns regarding climate change. Can you maybe share your thoughts on why that's not a priority?
Yeah, I did share with the Chamber of Commerce. I did have this question asked at me, so I have talked about it before. So the way I view climate change is, I believe that climate change is largely cyclical. Now, at the same time, I don't believe that humans don't impact the climate. I think it's very evident on the micro level. I just don't think we really have much of an impact on the macro level. But I do believe climate change happens. I believe it's cyclical. I believe the data bears that out. And it's very obvious that most people don't think that we can impact the macro level of climate change either. I mean, we're sitting here producing wind turbines, which have a huge recycling cost to our carbon emissions. Wind turbines, they produce, it's about 18 cents a kilowatt for a wind turbine to produce electricity. Well, we're fortunate here in the Northwest, where our hydro dams, it takes about 3 cents a kilowatt to produce electricity. The most optimal time for wind turbines to be producing electricity, or the most optimal time they can produce electricity, is at 3 a.m. in the morning. Wind turbines, you look at the data. Vista showed me this data. You look at the data from Vista Utilities, and it shows that wind turbines are best functioning at about the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning time frame. That's when the wind's most consistent and produces the best electricity for them. And that's when wind turbines are the least needed. Photovoltaic, solar panels, they're very inefficient at producing electricity, especially in the Northwest. So all the solutions that are coming out aren't really good solutions. So I don't even think those who believe that climate change is man-made, that they're serious about it, because they keep coming up and forcing the government to fund bad solutions.
Okay. What do you think is the most important local political issue in this election?
Oh man, it used to be taxes. That's why I got into this race. Was, I think that like I said at the very beginning, the more the government taxes us, I think the less freedom we have. The more government taxes us, the less money I have to provide for my kids, my family, my future. And so that used to be my issue, as maybe many of everyone in this webinar know. I was arrested on September 23rd for singing psalms at City Hall, protesting our mask resolution that our mayor and our city council had voted on and signed on. And so I think we have created a political culture that has intruded into people's lives in ways that the founders never would have imagined. I mean, think about this. What America are we living in, where our mayor on May 20th shut down businesses in downtown? Where in the Constitution does our mayor have the authority to shut down businesses, to tell my friends to shut down their businesses, not provide for their families, not provide for their employees, and at the same time, while that same mayor takes his taxpayer-funded paycheck? We've created a toxic political culture where our politicians, our governor, shut down the state on March 25th. Where in the Constitution does it say that our governor can shut down businesses and tell people not to make money while he continues to make his own taxpayer funded paycheck? That's our political class, our political ruling class creates two different standards, one for the people to live by and another that they live by. I got arrested singing psalms in front of City Hall on September 23rd, while the mayor was officiating a wedding on September 5th, not wearing a mask and not social distancing. Well, why do I get arrested for singing psalms in the parking lot of City Hall, and yet he can arbitrarily go to a wedding, not wear a mask, and officiate that wedding, and he not get arrested? We've created arbitrary political laws that are toxic. And so I think we need to kind of get back to principled political and predictable leadership that doesn't create this kind of toxic political environment. And this goes all the way up to President Trump and Joe Biden. I have words to say to them about this stuff. But that's why that's why it's so important that politics are local, is because I can go and sing psalms and protest unconstitutional mask resolutions. I can't go to DC and sing psalms. It's just not as feasible, and it doesn't have the same, I don't have the same relationship with President Trump that I do with our local city council. So we need principled political leaders, and not leaders who are just trying to go with the flow and not say anything. Not one political leader in our town spoke out in favor of defending me and my First Amendment rights that I was exercising on September 23rd. Not one political leader, not one city council member, not one mayor, not one county commissioner, not one. And so we really need to rethink how we're living, if we're really concerned about living by the Constitution or not, and if we're really concerned about being principled and not being partisan and political.
Certainly. Now, and you brought up your whole arrest that went viral, and then you got interviewed on Fox News and several other outlets. Why do you think this issue is resonating nationally?
I think there's a number of reasons why. Obviously, I think America is more divided than it ever has been. So when let's say one side of the political divide gets a handle on something or has an issue that goes viral, well, they want to champion it. The left want to champion something. When they see something go viral, they want to champion it. So I think there's just some partisan ugliness that contributes to this. But I also think that when you kind of try to sort through some of this, I think the average citizen just would like to be left alone, would like to go about their own lives without the government bothering them, would like to keep most of their money, would like to, have the freedom to worship, the freedom to hunt, the freedom to the Second Amendment rights, the Fifth Amendment rights. I think the average person wants that. And so when something like what happened to me happens, it shocks the system a little bit and be like, I had people from all over the world emailing me and said, I never in my wildest dreams would have thought America would have done something like that somewhere in America that could happen. A guy in Russia was like, I've preached the gospel in Russia, I've preached the gospel in India and all these places, and I can't believe that someone in Idaho got arrested for singing psalms while not wearing a mask. So I think it was a kind of a shock to the system and a surprise that kind of thing can happen.
Sure. Now, how would you contrast your position on the local mask ordinance as compared to your opponent?
Obviously, my opponent believes it's okay. My opponent believes that forcing everyone to wear something on their face is constitutional. He thinks that's okay and acceptable. So does Saudi Arabia. What other countries think requiring their citizens to put something on their face? Well, I think of other third world countries that I don't want to have anything to do with. I think that my opponent believes that masks generally probably work. The studies, but the thing is, the science is so out on that. If anybody who wants to have an honest conversation about if masks really legitimately work, you got to be reading both sides of the studies, which I have. I've been doing because of my political TV show, I have to do the research. I can't just be popping off. So I've read through hours and hours of studies. I've looked at videos. I've had doctors on our show. I've looked at all, and the science is disagrees heavily. In fact, it still says on the CDC website. It still says on the CDC website that masks don't work for the general population, but we still recommend them. It still says that. And there's a study I read that said cloth masks are basically ineffective at protecting people from contracting the virus. And in fact, it even said that cloth masks could possibly contribute to contact and connecting and getting the virus. And it said because what happens is these cloth masks, they actually create a damp environment that doesn't go away for the whole day because you're constantly breathing into them, and it actually helps viral particles attach to your mask because of that wet, damp environment. In our city council, everyone in our city council is wearing a cloth mask. No one's wearing an N95 mask. And I think there's actually some science behind any N95 masks that actually could lend to credibility there. But the cloth masks, I mean, we're trying to stop a mosquito with a chain link fence when you're talking about the size of viral aerosol particles. And so I just think that there's so much fear and pressure to go with the flow, and that we've rejected decades of science that has said that masks don't work, or masks don't work for the general population. That had been the consensus until really this last year, or that had been the broader narrative until this last year, that cloth masks do not, or that masks in general do not work for the general public. And so we've absolutely politicized this. My opponent is fine to go along with everything. I don't know all the motivations there, but it is, I mean, in the history of pandemics, we've never done anything like what we've done this year. And we've politicized it so bad that even decades of research don't matter anymore.
Fair enough. Now, what local actions would you propose to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic?
As a conservative, one of the principles that I stand on is that individuals are in the best position to make their own healthcare decisions. And so if an individual wants to wear a mask and put on an N95 mask, or put on, then that individual is free to do it. The government is not the best decision maker for our healthcare, and they've proved that time and time again. They proved that under Obamacare. They proved that before Obamacare. They proved that with our veterans hospitals. They've done a horrendous job with our healthcare. And I think as a conservative, one of the I believe that individuals are in the best position to make their own healthcare decisions. And if that means not go out of the house because of the virus, or if that means they're over 65 years or older and in a category that the virus tends to be a lot harder on, then they're going to make the best decisions possible. But what happened this last year is, Governor Little shut down all of Idaho. And in the Idaho Constitution, Section 56, the governor only has the legal authority to quarantine the unhealthy locations and to isolate the unhealthy individual. That's the only authority he has in the Constitution. Emergency orders don't just erase that authority. And yet what our governor did was he quarantined everybody, including the healthy, and all the locations, and he isolated everybody, including the healthy. And what happened was over 70% of our deaths in Idaho came from the ages 70 years and older, because he couldn't help and focus on the areas that actually needed his help, that actually needed focus. He focused everywhere across the state, spread himself too thin, and over 70% of our deaths come from ages 70 and over. Over 56% of our deaths in Idaho come from elderly homes. And so this is what happens when you don't follow the Constitution. The Constitution is actually there to protect Governor Little to make good decisions, and he made a horrible decision and wasn't able to protect the very places the Constitution gives him the authority to do. He spread himself too thin and created a disaster in the elderly homes across the state. And so that's why if you actually are principled in your decision-making process, you can actually do a better job saving the vulnerable and the weak and those who need that attention.
Now, the Moscow community has become deeply divided over the last decade along political, ideological, and religious fault lines on both the left and the right. This divisiveness issues could tear Moscow apart. Uh, how do you see those issues and maybe some solutions to bring the community back together?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's a concern of mine. In fact, I feel since my arrest, I've been flipped off pretty much everywhere I drive around town. My signs have been constantly vandalized. People can't keep my yard signs in their yard. I have to re-deliver them. I've had friends who've had businesses vandalized in all this, in this shutdown. And so I think first of all, everyone needs to take a deep breath in all this, and not respond with that first initial desire to want to impute the worst motives on people. That both the right and the left need to take a deep breath and not try to impute horrible motives on each other. And that goes into the second issue. The second thing that needs to happen is I think more forums like this need to happen. More conversations need to happen. More communication needs to happen. That's what community is. Community is a bunch of people who disagree with one another and yet still figure out how to get along. That's what makes a good community. And so I think more forums and conversations like this need to happen. And of course, we need to actually show that we care through our actions and through helping and serving one another. So you can't just have conversation. You got to back that up with helping your neighbor and serving each other and being real genuine with what's going on in each other's lives and everything. So that's why it's really good to lean on the most important elections that you have are local elections. Because again, if I, as a county commissioner, made a decision that you disagreed with, well, you can come into my office and fight with me about it and reason with me about it and disagree with me about it and prove me wrong. It's a lot harder to go to the governor in Boise or the president to argue with them about it. Your voice is best heard locally and everything. So I think those are the 2 or 3 things that we need to work on as a community here, and be willing to all laugh about it when we're done with the disagreement.
Great. Well, thank you. That's the end of the prepared section of questions we had. And now we're going to move on to the Q&A. So the first question that we have is, do you in your job pay local taxes?
Do I pay local taxes?
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I pay local taxes as a business owner. I pay local taxes as a homeowner. I pay local taxes every time I go shopping. Yeah, I mean, yep. I don't know.
Now the follow-up to that is they're saying, so reducing taxes is a large part of your campaign platform, but you have not specified what areas of the budget you would like to adjust to make that happen. Can you please specify what those would be and why?
Yeah. I've had a number of people ask me this question. It's a fair, legitimate question to ask, since my campaign is about not raising taxes and not voting to raise particularly property taxes. At this point, I've gone through the budgets. I've looked at them. I'm familiar with them. I have no plans on cutting anything yet, because I've never been county commissioner. I don't know the heads of each department. It does no good for me to come in and tell me to already be telling them how I'm going to cut their budgets. I would love to work with each department leader and sort through it and figure out how we can be fiscally responsible. I'm not an unreasonable guy, And I think that's the better approach than me just trying to pop off and say, well, I'm just going to cut everything. That's not helpful, but I will promise that I'm not going to raise your property taxes anymore. I mean, that's something that I can do from the jump.
So along that line, there's a question of how big are the county budgets currently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're about $20 million. You know, some of that's produced locally, some of that comes from the state, some of that comes from federal grants, and so you know, as county commissioner, every state is different in how they structure county commissioners. So as county commissioner, I would be responsible for a lot of the administrative side of what goes on in our county, which includes the sheriff's department, the court system, district attorneys, and so forth. We have another county commissioner board that oversees the highway budgets and the county roads. So the county commissioners in our state, the administrative county commissioners don't oversee the roads and the county roads and so forth, everything. So we just got to have a good working relationship with those county commissioners or highway county commissioners and everything.
Sure. Now, another question here is asking, you recently took part in a protest against the city of Moscow and the mask mandate. However, as a county commissioner, you'd be expected to work with the city employees and not fight them. Elaborate how you'll be able to establish a good working relationship with them.
Yeah, good question. So I understand not everyone knows my day-to-day life, but I spent the last 5-6 months talking to, communicating, emailing our city officials, emailing, texting with our city council. I met with our chief of police a couple times. I had him into my studio. I came into his office. I had our sheriff. I met with our sheriff about all this. So I've been communicating and trying to do my best as a good citizen to communicate with them. And as county commissioner, I will speak out against unconstitutional resolutions. I absolutely will. And that's something that I think a good principled leader needs to do, instead of what we have right now is everyone complying and being quiet and diversity of opinion is not accepted. In fact, if you have diversity of opinion, you can actually get arrested for it, like I did. That would be how I would govern as county commissioner. It would be no different. I would communicate like I have been. I've been meeting with them. I've gone into their office. They've come into my office, and I would do my best to try to sort through it peacefully. So.
Great. So the next question is, we haven't seen women involved in your podcast, Cross Politics, or in the Fight, the Feast conference. Is this intentional, or would you allow women to participate?
Are they asking, we haven't seen a woman being interviewed on our show?
They did not specify.
Okay. Well, I'll answer a couple of different ways. We have had women on our podcast. But because we are a men's show, we largely just, tend to have men on. There's nothing wrong with interviewing women at all. There's no sin in that at all. So I'm not against that. In terms of having let's say if we had a women, because I also have a podcast network called the Fight Laugh Feast Network. That's what you were referring to earlier. So we have a podcast network also, and I'm not opposed to having women do a show on our network at all. In fact, we've actually talked about it with my guys. We just haven't found the right fit yet, and getting new shows on our network has been a lower priority right now. So.
Okay. So do you foresee your faith affecting the way you work as the Latah County Commissioner?
Yeah, I think everyone's faith affects the way they work. I think that's inescapable. Everyone's morals affects the way they work. Everyone's beliefs systems affect the way they govern and work. So that's kind of an inescapable concept. I mean, Tom Lamar, my opponent, his faith system, his belief system affects the way he rides a bike around town. So that absolutely. I mean, I believe that we should love our neighbor. I believe we should not steal. I believe we should not kill. I believe we should not murder. I believe we should not commit adultery. I believe all those things should impact the way I live and represent my community. I think I think committing adultery is a sin. I'm not going to do that as county commissioner. I think stealing is a sin. I'm not going to do that as county commissioner. So I think absolutely my faith is going to affect me. That's inescapable with anybody.
Next question is right, wrong, or indifferent. The mask law was put in place for a reason, whether you agree with it or not. Why should residents trust that you aren't going to break the rules anytime that you don't agree with them?
Well, again, just because a mayor puts together a resolution is not a law. What the mayor signed in was a resolution. It's not a law. There's very different between resolutions and laws. And our mayor doesn't have the authority to break the Constitution. So if he doesn't have unlimited authority. He can't just tell me to ride my bike and that's all you can ride. He can't just tell me to do certain things. It's just unconstitutional, or he just doesn't have the authority to do it. So when that happens, we got to be thinking citizens. I want citizens that think. I want citizens that know how to reason. I don't want citizens that just blindly go with whatever the mayor and the city council tell them to do. And so in the same way, if I put forward some sort of county resolution or something that's not logical, that's arbitrary, that's all these things, I want you to have the freedom to come in and tell me in my office, don't do that. I'm going to peacefully protest this. I'm going to exercise my First Amendment rights, just so you know, FYI. And so I want all the citizens of Latah County to be able to be thinking through these things. To be a good citizen is not to blindly follow the mayor. And that's what I think actually creates healthy communities and keeps our politicians accountable.
Certainly. Next question is, your opponent touts his ability to build relationships and consensus. Effective county governance requires that ability. Your stance and style appears to be challenging, which may be necessary. How will you adapt your style to be able to be an effective problem solver for the county government?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a couple answers to that question. First of all, I have no problem building consensus in the county. Let's say, do we put a park, over on this hill, or do we put a park over on this hill? Well, let's build community consensus on that. That's great. Community consensus is important. But if we're going to put in an unconstitutional mandate, like mass resolutions, well, consensus does not make constitutional law. Constitution makes constitutional law, and so we work from that document. So it depends on the issue where you need to build consensus. You absolutely do, and where you follow the law and the Constitution is where you follow the law and the Constitution, regardless of what the consensus is on that issue. So I think. Like I've been trying to put forward, the vision I've been trying to put forward is that if I'm doing something, or if I'm putting a resolution forward, or if I'm talking about not increasing our county property taxes. I mean, Latah County is the second highest on average property tax county in Idaho. And so I'm going to have all these good reasons. I'm going to come to you hopefully with good logical reasons, but you can come and argue with me on this, and I want you to, and I want you to, help me, guide me, be counsel, be advice, as your, and so I can be a better leader for you. So there's areas where consensus is great and important, and I need to do a good job building relationships with both the right and the left, both with the hunters and the farmers. And so that's all very challenging, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to let everyone know where I stand, so you can come and talk to me, as opposed to, I don't know where Tom Lamar stands on half the issues. Building consensus doesn't mean anything if it's unconstitutional laws. So I want to try to be as clear and transparent as possible about where I stand, so you can come and communicate with me, ask me questions like this group's doing.
Perfect. Now, do you have any desire to run for federal office, whether it is Congress or for the presidency?
Man, I did not want. I had no intention of running for county commissioner. What happened was, I had been working, talking with friends, trying to find someone for about 4 months, for about 4 or 5 months since November of the previous year, trying to find someone running for county commissioner. The Friday, the last day to submit paperwork to run for county commissioner, my buddy calls me and says, "Dude, you can't find anybody. You need to run." And so obviously I'm motivated politically. I'm motivated for my county. I love my county. I've been working hard to try to find someone to run for county commissioner. And so on Friday, the last day to file paperwork, my buddy called me Friday morning. I mean, it was like 7:30 in the morning. He called me. He's like, "You need to run, brother, since you can't find anybody." And so I did, because I couldn't find anybody. And so I'm in this race. I want to be in this race. I do. It's not that I don't, but it was not a my life, and I think more political leaders need this kind of. I don't want to elect political leaders that want to be in office for life. So I have no desire to be in politics for life. I want to do this for a time, serve my community for a time, hopefully have a big impact. And so that's my goal. I do not want to do anything in Boise. I do not. I have no plans to do anything in Boise. I'm raising kids. My kids are 10, 8, and 6 years old, and I couldn't imagine leaving them for 3 months to go down to Boise and then come home. It does not fit my life at all.
Okay. Now this next question. So it seems that they're concerned because they have seen on Facebook your relationship with some of the other county commissioners. And they're wondering what, if that's your engagement on a social media platform, how will that translate when you're working with them in person?
Yeah, well, I hope, I'm not quite sure what everything's being referred to. I mean, but I have some ideas. I hope that I'm no different in person than I am on social media. So I hope I talk. If I see something wrong, I'm going to call it out on Facebook, and if I see something that I disagree with in person, I'm going to talk to you about it. I don't want to live two different lives. I want to be. I think what happens is people don't. I think people have a hard time, generally speaking the unvarnished truth, and so sometimes that comes off as like, "Oh, this might be a mean guy," but in all honesty, or in the reality, is it's just we aren't used to talking transparently and clearly with one another because we have a cancel culture. I mean, we live in a cancel culture where people can get fired for not being on board with Black Lives Matter. We live in a culture where you can get canceled for being Christian at a major corporation. I've had friends do that. I've had friends get fired at Amazon because they were Christians. So I think there is a real cancel culture, but when people push against that, I think it's kind of or try to live without the cancel culture in mind, try to live independently of the cancel culture and speak the truth. I think what sometimes it might come off as, it might have appearance of, oh, this guy's just mean, when I hope I'm just trying to be honest, and I'll do the same thing over at lunch and have the same conversation with you over at lunch, and I'll buy your beer too at the same time.
Okay. Do you believe in the separation of church and state?
Yes, but not as it's been articulated by secularists. So what I mean by that is there is no constitutional separation of church and state. You can't find that language in the Constitution. What you can find is the separation of federal government and church. So Congress shall make no law. That's the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion, free speech, etc. It's saying that Congress can't make any laws regarding the church. So separation of church and state was in a letter from Thomas Jefferson, and that language has been co-opted to say, well, see, it's constitutional, and it actually isn't. What separation of church and state is doing is actually restricting the federal government. The First Amendment actually restricts the federal government, not the states. Now, with that said, I believe the Bible gives us three governments. the Bible gives us the Bible's defined three governments specifically. He's given the family government. There's the family government. There's the church government, and then there's the civil government. Those are three definable governments that God's given us in the Bible. Now, of course, you got Kiwanis clubs, basketball, intramural clubs, stuff like that. There's other social structures that we can have within our society, but the three that God has defined, and which means that the civil government has its orders from God, the family government has its orders from God, and the church government has its orders from God. And the church's job is not to do politics. The church's job is not to rule the state of Idaho, to rule to make laws in Idaho, to execute criminals for capital punishment crimes, to make sure that thieves are going to jail. That's not the church's job. That's the government's job. So I think what happens is this question of separation of church and state, it gets a little muddy because we've had so much secular assumptions in our mind over time. When I think the church's job is to preach the gospel, to disciple the nations, to minister to baptism and the Lord's Supper. That's the church's job. And the government's job is to keep the peace and wield the sword, as it says in Romans 13. So keep the peace and do good to those who are doing good, and do and enact justice to those who are doing evil. That's the government's job. And the church has no business, creating laws and so forth. And so that's what I believe that what the separation of church and state should look like. It should look real separate.
Okay. Now this is going to be last question. We're going to take a little break and then transition to the audiences here with us live. So, and for those who are joining us virtually, please continue submitting different questions that you have, and we'll try to get to them. All right. So this question is, what specific incentives will you take to ensure that every member of the Latah County community, regardless of sex, religion, and/or political affiliation, feels respected and safe?
So part of the assumption here in this question is that politicians should cater to special interest groups, and I think we should actually get rid of the political pressures of special interest groups, and not carve out laws and regulations for special interest groups. I think we should get rid of all laws that affect special interest groups. So, for example, the reason why we've had politics, we've created a culture of politics where it actually incentivizes special interest groups, because we've created unfair laws that supports one group over another, or benefits one group over another. And so then we just have this cascading effect of creating special interest laws for groups. So I honestly think the government's job is to, and I'll speak to the county, I won't speak broadly. The county, my job as county commissioner is to make sure our sheriff is funded, to make sure our court system is functional, to make sure we have the budgets for a county prosecutor, all the administrative functions. That's my job. And so I should make sure all that is there, and that there's no special interest benefits in the areas that we administer budgets over. And so that's how I think we need to be thinking about these things. The government's job should be to get out of your life to make sure you're protected, and that you have a peaceful community, and that the criminals are judiciously punished. And that's just my administrative function. I don't like to think in categories of special interest groups. I like to think in categories of, okay, principally, how should this work out for our community, and not how this should work out for maybe this group versus that group, and so forth.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to go to our live audience here. You can ask a question, then I'll reiterate so we make sure it's understood. All right. What questions do we have? No one. Yeah.
What's the biggest focus that you're going to be detailing if you win county commissioner?
It's
what's the biggest proposal or idea that
So what is the biggest proposal you're wanting to focus on if you win?
Oh man, that's a complicated question for me. So obviously, I've been running on my biggest feature has been running on not raising taxes and solving kind of the current trend in raising property taxes every year. Now, since I've been arrested, I think, wow, I thought, America used to believe in the Constitution. I thought that we believed in the First Amendment rights, that the government cannot infringe upon those rights, and the government cannot tell you how to worship, where to worship, when to worship, what to wear when you worship, all those things. So I'd say the second issue is I think I would hope to have a good impact on how we think principally about our leaders and how we think about principles in relationship to how the government should be working with their local communities. And then I got some kind of big dream scenarios that I would like to work on. I think property taxes are just about the most unjust form of taxation, because property taxes, all they do, and again, like I said at the very beginning, I don't have a problem with the government collecting taxes. I think that's a legitimate feature and function. I'm not an anti-taxer at all, but I do think how we tax our citizens creates certain dysfunctions in a local community. And so I don't really own my house. I mean, if I stop paying my property taxes, well, the government just takes my house. They bring their guns to my house, and they got the big guns, and they kick me out of my house, and I lose my house. So it's I don't really own my house. So I'd like to create a better tax structure that I think creates a more generous and giving community. And so that issue right there, that's probably a 30-year issue. It's more in the power of legislators to deal with how we're taxed locally and not with the county commissioners. All we can do is raise property taxes or lower them, kind of thing. That's all the power we have. We don't have power to create certain tax structures. So I would love to kind of solve that problem working with our legislators over the coming years. And I think if we removed and created a better tax structure, I actually think it creates a healthier citizenry and a more willing community that wants to support one another and is not doesn't have the threat of losing their house if they can't pay their taxes. If an old lady can't pay her taxes 1 year.
Next question. Going once, twice.
What does it cost to run a county commissioner race?
What does it cost to run a county commissioner race?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't won. I know I've raised, I think, about $16,000, maybe $15,000 to $18,000. I haven't put a pencil to it. And it costs money. I mean, you got to buy signs, you got to hold town hall events, you got to do Facebook advertising and marketing. I put together a video that's going to be coming out here this weekend. So it's time and money, man. And of course, all the expenses that don't show up on my expenses, my campaign reporting are, I drive here, I go there, I'm at this meeting, I'm at this webinar. So there's a lot of personal expense that doesn't even show up on your campaign report, just because you're just putting in your own hard work and everything. So this has been my first race ever. I've learned a lot. It actually has been a good civic lesson for me. And so I hope I'm a more knowledgeable citizen because of everything that I've done. So I don't know how much my opponent has raised. I do know the Democratic Party locally has a lot of money. I'm sure my opponent's probably around the same place I am. I just haven't checked his campaign financing reporting, but you can Google it and find it.
Okay. Another question.
What's your opinion on the policies that are being proposed by Joe Biden?
Yeah, good question. So obviously I'm a conservative Christian, so I absolutely first and foremost disagree on his pro-abortion policies. That would be my first beef with him. I believe abortion is murder, and I believe we need to protect the most innocent in our society, and a society that can't do that is a society that's failing fundamentally morally. Secondly, I disagree with his stance on taxes. Like my big principle, like I said at the very beginning, is the more the government collects from us, the less freedoms we have locally. And so I want to do the best job I can to make sure the citizens keep most of their money. And again, like I said, I'm not an anti-taxer. I do think citizens need to be contributing and paying taxes and supporting their government. That needs to happen. But we've just gone so far down this taxation road. I mean, everywhere you go, everywhere you turn, every dollar you give out, you're taxed on it. You go to the store, you're taxed on it. You go to the gas pump, you're taxed on it. You go buy a house, you're taxed on it. I mean, the government has created a system of taxation that's just insane. And so I'm fine with the Trump tax cuts. I don't think they're even close to what needed to happen. We're constantly creating loopholes. Trump tax cuts kind of do that a little bit. I mean, we're just our IRS. I mean, you're probably breaking a tax code right now. I mean, it's just insane, our taxes. The other place, the other real problem I have with Joe Biden is that he will not condemn the violence from his party. He will not condemn Antifa. He will not condemn the violence of Black Lives Matter. He said the other day, he said Antifa is an idea. And it's like, no, it's not. Antifa is going around and destroying Portland right now. I mean, Antifa was creating riots in Portland for 105 days, and so I think the Democratic Party is driving us off the cliff at 80 miles an hour, and I think the Republican Party is driving us off the cliff at 60 miles an hour. They're both taking us to the same cliff. One's just going a little faster than the other. And so, but since that question was particularly to Joe Biden, those are probably my top three concerns with Joe Biden.
Any others?
So my question is, where exactly does the mask mandate interfere with your First Amendment rights? Because I know you were saying something about worshiping where you want, and the government cannot infringe on that. However, the mandate was not specifically targeting special groups like you were talking about. It was a mandate for the entire community, like you said you agree with. I don't understand where the First Amendment really comes in with that right. As you can see, I'm wearing a mask and freely speaking, pretty loud. So.
Yeah, good question. I heard it. I think it's pretty clear that the government has no authority to tell us what we need to be wearing in worship. Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion. So as soon as the government tells you to wear a hijab, or the government tells you to wear a scarf or a head covering or a mask, they're telling you how to worship. So I think it's just a basic. I mean, the reason why the First Amendment is so fundamental to our society is because what it's doing, it's limiting the government. It's not limiting me. It's saying the government shall make no law. Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of free speech, religion, and petitioning. That's what the Constitution's doing. It's limiting the government. So when the government comes in and then says, "Oh, you need to stand 6 feet apart from each other while you're singing, and you need to wear a mask while you're singing," well, all of a sudden is the government's making all sorts of laws on how you're worshiping, and how you're protesting, and how you're assembling, and how you're petitioning. And so I guess that'd be my answer, is that they're trying to tell me what to wear while I worship.
That says love thy neighbor. Do you not agree with the science backing masks, like having any sort of effect on the spread at all?
Could you repeat the first part of that question?
The commandment, love thy neighbor, is it not loving thy neighbor to wear your mask to protect the people around you?
Yeah. Okay. So let me repeat that question so I make sure I got what you're trying to say. Basically, you're saying it. You're asking the question that the Bible tells us to love thy neighbor and you not wearing a mask is not loving your neighbor. So shouldn't you be obeying your own faith in how you live in community here in Moscow? Is that the question?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, great. So first of all, love thy neighbor is not a it's defined by the scriptures. It's not defined by the mayor. And you know, so part of my response would be, well, why doesn't the mayor love me, love his neighbor, and not disobey the Constitution? Why doesn't the mayor love his neighbor and protect my First Amendment rights? Secondly, related to that, like I said, I don't know if you were here at the very beginning of my talk of this forum, but the science is absolutely out if masks work for the general population or not. In fact, on the CDC's website, it still says it on the CDC website. They haven't taken it off. It says masking does not work for the general population, but we still recommend it. And there's study after study. The last 20 years of mask study are conflicting with one another on if masks work. And they even break down, do cloth masks work, do N95 cloth masks, N95 masks work, do medical surgical masks work. They break all that down, and there's actually very conflicting in the scientific community if they really work for the general population. I don't believe they do. I believe we're being fed a lie. I believe that this whole pandemic has been politicized beyond rational reasoning. And that's why we even got unconstitutional, irrational, arbitrary local resolutions here. Like I pointed out at the very beginning, how come I get arrested for going and singing in a parking lot and the Mayor Lambert doesn't get arrested for officiating a wedding? I mean, it's because it's arbitrary. And that's bad government policy. It's just bad civics. It's not loving your neighbor. And so I would want to think of loving your neighbor as more scripturally defined and not how our mayor or our city council would define it.
Okay. Now, back to the online, there's a question, because you'd mentioned earlier about special interest groups. So they want to know your thoughts on the tax incentives that were offered to MZ and NRS. And then a follow-up to that is, what about churches? Are they a special interest group with them being tax exempt?
So no, that's the separation of church and state issue. That's why that's so fundamental. Churches don't get taxed because of the separation of church and state issue. So I've no problem with that. I actually, in a perfect world, I would like to eliminate all the levels that the government can tax us, right? So a corporation gets taxed, my CEO gets taxed, I get taxed, and then I pay my housekeeper and they get taxed, and then I pay. We just have levels of how the government collects taxation, and I would like to untangle that. Now, I don't have a blueprint for that, but I would like to detangle the massive taxing schemes that the government has on us. In terms of tax incentives, I think the government giving out tax incentives picks winners and losers. So in principle, I'm against that. I do think NRS and MZ, it depends on the tax incentive. So I actually don't know the tax incentives that MZ is getting. I haven't worked there since 2016. I've heard that they're getting them. And I don't know the tax incentives that NRS is getting. So it would depend. Like, for example, is MZ, let's say they're building their building and they don't have to pay property taxes while they're building their building. That's a tax incentive. Or I think there's a tax incentive in Idaho, and MZ might be taking advantage of this. NRS might be taking advantage of this. There's a tax incentive in Idaho is if you're growing, I think that, and you're hiring a lot, I think they eliminate or reduce some of the payroll taxes that you have to pay while you're in this growth spurt. I forget what it was. I used to know what it was when I was heavily involved on the corporate side of things. So there's certain tax incentives like that where I'm like, you know, you're kind of picking winners and losers. You're not being fair. I would prefer them not to be there, but also a business can take advantage of those because they're there, and they actually can end up hiring more people in our community because of that. You know, so again, I mean, I think the government playing all these tax games is dumb, and I would prefer this not even to be an issue.
Sure. Well, we've reached the end of the hour. So thank you, Gabe, so much for your time. I think it's been very, very beneficial for everyone. And I mean, we can try to do something again after the election.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And you can go to my website, wrenchforidaho.com, and you can email me through my website if there's more questions and more that people want to converse with me on.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.